Um, I was born in Germany just before Hitler came to power. Okay, just before Hitler came to power. And so at first, I never knew what it was like to live without a Hitler. But at first, I didn't know what was going on, and I had a fairly happy childhood until one day, my uncle came home. I should first tell you that we lived in Lauterbach, Germany. Lauterbach was a very small town. My family consisted of my parents, a sister who is younger than I am by 3 years, and at that time, besides my parents, my grandmother lived with us, also an aunt and uncle who were married, and then another uncle. And he was a young man going to the university. And he seemed to hear more what was going on in Germany and in the world because of that. My father, he was busy making a living for all the people that lived under our roof. And one day, my uncle comes home, and he had this loud argument with my father. And the argument was about whether to leave Germany or not. And I couldn't help but hear what they said because they were so loud. And I heard my father say, "It's easy for you to say, you only have yourself to take care of. But I have to take care of all the people under my roof. And I don't know any language but German. I think of myself as German. And we've lived in this country for many, many, many years, and nothing ever happened. And surely somebody's gonna stop this madman Hitler." My father was an Orthodox Jew. He had a lot of faith in God, in countries and people. So that's why he thought somebody would stop Hitler. But as you know, no one did. In 1936, my uncle decided it was time for him to leave. And he took with him my grandmother, also my aunt and uncle, and they left for Palestine, which is Israel now. I miss my grandmother very much. We stayed on in Lauterbach for a little while longer. But one day, we felt the hand of Hitler. I still remember my parents coming home one day, being very upset, because what had happened, they had to go and register at a Nazi office. And that meant that all the Jews in Germany had to register. And therefore, they knew where every Jew lived. They also received identity cards, and these identity cards had to be worn at all times when you stepped out of the house. On that identity card, there was a big J, which stood for Jude, which is German for Jew. And that's why my parents were very upset. Then, the next thing that happened, Hitler decreed that Jews could not hold any property. And what that meant for us, we had to give up our home. My father had to give up his small textile business. And what to do now? Since we lived in a very small town, it was like a village, mostly farming community, he couldn't find a job. So he decided we should move to a big city by the name of Karlsruhe. And it was a very modern city, I remember. And also the other reason that we moved there was because he had a brother living there with his family. But when we arrived in Karlsruhe, nobody wanted to rent an apartment to us, because by then also Hitler decreed that Jews and non-Jews were not allowed to mix in any way. So nobody wanted to rent an apartment to us. Therefore, we stayed with my aunt and uncle and our 3 cousins. And we even shared a bedroom with them because their apartment was very small. So 5 kids in 1 bedroom, it was bedlam. We stayed with my aunt and uncle for about 6 weeks when my father was lucky enough to find an apartment for us. It was a very small apartment. It consisted only of 3 rooms. The main entryway was through the kitchen. On one side was the bedroom, on the other side the living room. The bathroom was out in the hallway, and we shared it with another family. But we didn't care. At least we had a place of our own. What I missed the most, I didn't have a yard to play in. So, my mother allowed me to go into the street, and I had to stay in front of the apartment house. But there I met some other kids, and I always used to have a good time playing with them. And one day, as I was having a nice time with my friends, I noticed some Nazis walking towards us down the sidewalk. And I had never seen Nazis up close. I knew that they were causing all our problems. And as they came closer and closer, I looked at them. And suddenly an emotion came over me that I had never experienced before. And that emotion was hatred. I hated them. And without even thinking, I go to the gutter, and as they passed by, I picked up pebbles, and I threw those pebbles at their backs, not really meaning to hit them, but some of them must have, because they turned around and they started going after us. It was lucky that we knew the alleyways of Karlsruhe better than they did, and we managed to escape. But when I got back to our apartment, my mother had watched the whole incident from our living room window, and she was furious with me. And she said, from now on, I cannot trust you to play by yourself outside anymore. Either your father or I will have to be with you. So I lost some of my independence, and I was not happy about it. But for the Jewish people, life had become very, very restricted. We couldn't go anymore where we wanted to go, because signs appeared in the windows of stores. These signs read, Juden verboten, which means Jews are forbidden here. So we couldn't go. I don't know how my parents managed to get food for us, for instance, or clothing, but I never remember being hungry. These signs not only appeared in the stores, they also appeared in front of the theater and movies, also the concert halls, and even the park that we used to frequent Sabbath afternoon when the weather was nice. We couldn't go in there anymore. Even on benches, they would have those signs. Juden verboten, Jews are forbidden here. Life became harder and harder. It was time for me to also go to school, and school there quite different than here. The day seemed very long. We didn't have any of the extracurricular activities that you enjoy. We didn't have any sports. I don't remember having any, playing games or various games or whatnot. It was strictly study, study, study. There were only man teachers. We had to sit at our desk a certain way. We couldn't have our elbows on the desk. We had to have our feet planted on the floor. We couldn't cross our legs. Also, you never spoke to your neighbor. You couldn't look out of the window. And the only time that you were allowed to speak was if the teacher spoke to you. But I took it all in stride. After all, I didn't know what other schools were like. And also, it was perfectly all right for the teacher to hit you if you didn't obey. I felt sorry for the boys because the teacher's hand, wherever it would fall on them, they would get hit. And sometimes it must have hurt pretty bad. Us girls, we had to walk to the front of the room where there was a desk which was on a platform. We walked up about 2 or 3 steps, and we had to hold our hands like so. The teacher would take his ruler and hit the tips of our fingers, and that hurt. So that's the other reason I tried to be a good girl. The thing, though, that I remember the most, and which hurt me the most, was the anti-Semitism, the prejudice, and the hatred that I experienced during those days. Going to school and coming home I dreaded it every day. Because children, some of them, who were not Jewish, would go after us and yell after us. All kinds of words I still remember. Twice killer, dirty Jew, and what have you. Also, I had long braids, and they would take my braids. Sometimes the kids sitting behind me at school would put it in the inkwell. And then my braid would go against my sweater or dress or blouse, and I would come home, my back full of ink. And my mother was not very happy with me, but I didn't know what to do. Prejudice is a terrible thing. So is hatred and bullying, to be bullied. And I have taught my children always to respect everyone. You don't have to agree with them, but you can respect them. And never to have prejudice against anyone, no matter what they look like or who they are. And thank God they followed in my steps, and they're teaching their children to also never to have prejudice against anyone. It would be a much better world if all of the people on this earth would feel that way. We would have peace, and wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? School lasted for a year for me, and then Hitler decreed Jewish children could not attend school anymore. So my father tried to teach us whatever he was able to. But that didn't last very long, because one night we were woken up because there was so much noise out on the street. I remember rushing to the window, wondering what was going on, and as I looked out the window, it was as though the whole city of Karlsruhe was burning. What had happened? The Nazis were burning all the synagogues. The synagogues is like a church. They were burning all the synagogues across Germany. I still remember my father coming up behind me, and when he looked out the window, he says, "Our synagogue is burning. I better go and see if I can save any religious articles out of it." I remember having to say goodbye to him. And we thought, well, he'll be back in an hour or so. And I still remember my mother waiting for him to come home that night. I still can see her pacing the bedroom floor, back and forth, wondering, where is he? Why isn't he coming home? This was the night of November 9th and 10th, the night of the broken glass or crystal night. Why do we call it crystal night or broken glass? Because the next day we found out that the Nazis, it wasn't enough for them to burn our synagogues. They also broke the windows of Jewish homes, apartments. They looted those. They even threw furniture out of the windows. And there was so much glass laying on the streets that night, that's what it's called, the night of the broken glass. Also, we found out that all the men that had gone into the streets were rounded up and taken to concentration camps. Our father didn't come home the next day. And I don't know how long he was gone. But I've often wondered if the German people, seeing what was happening that night, if they would have stood up to Hitler, to the Nazi government, and told them enough is enough, if they would have stood up, maybe we wouldn't have had World War II. But nobody said anything. No country, no people. And it gave Hitler the green light to go on with what he was doing. Yes, that was very sad. I've never understood that. I don't remember how much time passed. One day, I was playing in the kitchen when the front door of our apartment opened up, and there stood this man, all covered with blood and mud. He was bent over, he was shaking. We had right across from the door a black wood-burning stove. And as he came through the door, he was putting his hands too close to the stove. And it was at that very moment that I recognized my father, and I screamed at him and I said, "Papa, Papa, it's hot!" Well, my mother came into the kitchen. She took one look at him. She went towards him and took him into the bedroom. My father was a sick man for quite some time. But then after, I don't know how much time passed, but after a while, I noticed that he would be gone all day and he would come home in the evening complaining that his hands and fingers and arms were hurting him. So one day I said to him, "Papa, what do you do?" And he says, "I've become a bricklayer." At that moment, I didn't question it at all. I just took it. But it was in the back of my mind always. And one day I asked about it. And I found out that my father had been put to forced labor. The next thing that happened to us, there was a loud knock on the kitchen door. My mother opens up the door, and there stood two Gestapo, two Nazis. I could tell she was scared. But she asked them, "What do you want?" And they said, "Just go pack and don't ask any questions." But my mother said, "Well, for how long are we going to be gone, and where are you taking us?" And I remember them getting angry with her and them yelling at her, "Mach schnell, which means hurry, hurry. don't ask so many questions, just go pack. So my mother went to the bedroom to pack. And I had a doll that I loved very much. And I always used to take her wherever I went. So I go to the living room to pick her up, but one of the Nazis follows me. He sees me picking up the doll, and he takes a hold of my arm and starts shaking me and saying, "Where you're going, you don't need this doll." And I looked at him and I thought to myself, he wants that doll. But out loud I said to him, if I can't have that doll, you can't have her either. And I took my doll that I loved so very much, I threw her down on the floor, and her face, which was made out of porcelain, broke into many pieces. I was very upset. I was so upset that I don't remember my sister or my father during that whole episode. After a while, I see my mother waiting in the kitchen. Slowly, I go and join her, and as I do so, I look at that small apartment, and I think to myself, I just know I will never see this place again. I was so upset. I got to the kitchen. I took a hold of the leg of the kitchen table, and I would not let it go. My mother had the worst time trying to get my hand loose and to get me out that door. The Nazis took us to the railroad station, and there the whole station was filled with people. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was the day. It was October 24th, 1940. That was the day that the Nazis were deporting all the Jews of Karlsruhe. I could tell that some people had been waiting there for quite some time because they were laying on blankets or their coats. Some people were sitting on their suitcases. Some people on the floor. Older people wringing their hands, tears coming down their faces and saying, "What's going to happen to us? What's going to happen to us?" We didn't have the communication that we have now. And people didn't know what was going on. The only thing that we were allowed to have once in a while was a newspaper or listening to the radio. But that was controlled by the Nazi government, so we really didn't know what was going on. After a long while, we were put onto the train, and it was a regular train. It had windows. It wasn't a cattle train. And as we were traveling into the countryside, it was warm on the train because there were so many of us. And therefore, some people opened up the windows, and therefore, some people decided they would jump out of the windows and escape, not realizing that there were Nazis on the roof of the train. They had guns, and as these people jumped out of the windows, they were shot at. How many made it? I don't know, but I heard the shots. And the train just kept going and going until it reached the border of Germany and France. And there it stopped, and soon we heard a voice over the loudspeaker saying many things. I only remember two things. One of them was, if you have any money on you, get rid of it. If you disobey orders, you will be shot. I noticed my mother hiding money on her person, and I became panicky. And I did something that kids never did to grown-ups in those times. I elevated my voice to her and I said, "Mother, did you hear what they said? They're going to shoot you." And she looked at me in surprise and she says, "Well, everybody heard you. Here, take the money, go put it down the toilet." It was only a few bills. Later on, I learned that most of the money that my parents had was left in Germany in our bedroom under the mattress. So I took those few bills and I went to the toilet, threw it in, and as I came back to our compartment, I looked into all the other compartments, and sure enough, the Nazis were searching everyone. If somebody had disobeyed orders, they took them off the train. They lined all those people up on the platform. When they were all done, they shot all of those people. I heard the shots, but my mother took my face, put it in her lap. She didn't want me to watch. Then the train started up again, and now we were in for a long journey. I don't remember exactly how long it took, but they were taking us all the way to the southern part of France, Vichy, France. It must have taken 1.5 to 2 days. I don't remember much about the trip. I do remember not getting anything to eat, but worst of all, we didn't get anything to drink. And I was very, very thirsty. So I would go around the train, lick all the windows, just to get some moisture within me. When we got to our destinations, we were taken off the train, put onto trucks. And these trucks took us to the concentration camp. The name of the camp was Gurs, G-U-R-S. The first time that I caught sight of that camp, it gave me a most dismal feeling because it looked all brown, gray, and black. The reason for that was that the barracks were made out of wood, the roof of the barracks were made out of tar paper, there was hardly any grass, and that had turned brown already, and there was maybe 1 or 2 trees. And there was one barrack after the other. It was a large, large camp, almost like a small village. Excuse me. Excuse me. And then they separated the men and the women. We had to say goodbye to our father, and I was very upset. I didn't want him to go. I wanted him to stay with us. And my mother, though, she tried to calm me, and she told me, "Your father and all the rest of the men will be right next door to us. We're just separated by barbed wire." So I had to say goodbye to him. The women were put into a large barrack, and there were many of us. And now the Nazis were looking for any gold. If you had any gold fillings or gold crowns, the Nazis pulled your teeth. If you had any gold jewelry, they took that. I still remember my mother had pierced ears. She wore gold hoop earrings, and they yanked those earrings right up her earlobes. They didn't give her time or a chance to take them off herself. And I still can hear her cry out with the pain. Then they gave us mattresses. I was able to carry that mattress. I was 8 years old by then. It was very light because it was filled with straw. But we were luckier than some. because some people just slept on the straw. And also, it was a single mattress, so my sister and I shared it with our mother. I don't think she ever she got a decent night's sleep. Then we went to our bed. When we got there, it was completely dark because there were no windows. But somebody found some flaps to be held open, and that's the way we used to get light and some fresh air. And I saw what was in the barrack. It was one bed after the other. There were no chairs, no tables, just beds, but there was a pot-bellied stove in the middle of the barrack, and also a scale hanging from the ceiling. And I wondered how come. Well, I didn't have to wait too long, because once a day they would throw one loaf of bread into the barrack. And that loaf of bread had to be divided amongst us all. And I never saw any eating utensils during that time. We didn't need them. So a lady was chosen to do the dividing. She would break up a piece, weigh it, and hand it out. And at first, it worked out okay. But when we became hungrier and hungrier, it didn't work out so well. And when somebody thought that somebody else had gotten more bread than she did, fights would break out between these women. These women who had been ladies at one time turned into animals. But that is what happens when you are starving. It hurts, and you will do anything for one or food. Excuse me. The other thing that we used to get to eat or drink was soup 3 times a day. But we didn't need a spoon for that, we could just drink it. And that was it, that's all I remember having. And the sanitary conditions in that camp, they were horrible. I never saw any running water. My mother had found a tin can, and she would put it out, and it rained a lot there, which was good, because the can would be filled with rain. My mother would bring it in, and that's the way she used to wash us off. We had lice in our hair, lice on our clothing. There were rats and mice, and the rats were very, very hungry, and they would also bite us if we were not careful. And there were all kinds of insects also. The grown-ups, they were taken every day to work. It was a work camp, not a death camp, a work camp, even though people also died there from starvation. So I didn't see my mother. And us children, we had to be sharply at 9 o'clock in front of a barrack. And there they would have roll call for us. After roll call, they would take us on long walks. And on those walks, you couldn't stop for anything. And I always used to tell my sister, make sure you go to the bathroom ahead of time. And they were very long walks because I got holes in the soles of my shoes. And my mother had a hard time trying to find something to put in the shoe so I wouldn't get calluses so badly. Then we would come back after a long walk and have our soup. In the afternoons, us younger children were taken to that large barrack. And there I had a good time with my friends. And we used to play games, and I learned board games. And also a woman would come once in a while, and she would yodel and sing for us. And I always used to think, well, she must be from Switzerland because she always. And the other reason was she would hand out triangles of Swiss cheese. And those little triangles of Swiss cheese, they were like little appetizers. We'd eat them, and we wanted more. So badly we wanted more. So fights would break out between us children. The older ones would take from the younger ones, the stronger from the weaker. And one day I even took a piece of cheese from my own sister. That's how desperate we were for food. Also, one day I decided to talk to that lady. And I went up to her and I said to her, you see how we live here, how hungry we are, and what the conditions of the camp are. Why don't you tell the rest of the world about it so they can do something about it? And she looked at me in surprise, and all she did, she stroked my hair and she said to me, things are going to get better, things are going to get better. So I expected things to get better, but they never did. I also noticed that my mother was getting thinner and thinner, and I worried about my dad. So one day I said to my sister, let's go visit him. I was also very homesick for him. So I took her by the hand, and we went to the entrance of the camp. Right away the guard comes out asking, what are you doing here? And I was very polite, which was not easy. I explained to him that we want to go see our father, and then we would not run away, we'd come right back. Well, he must have argued with me, because whatever he said, and I don't remember what it was, I didn't like it, and I became very angry. I kicked him on his boot, and I said to him, tu sale cochon, which is French for you dirty pig. And I took my sister's hand, we walked out of the camp, and I said to her, whatever you do, don't look back, because he might shoot us. Well, he didn't shoot us. We found the men's camp, and there somebody showed us in which barrack our father was. When my father saw us, and when we saw him, we were so overjoyed. We cried for joy. And we had a good visit, except one thing did happen. They were handing out to everyone raw eggs in the shell. And I could hardly believe it, because eggs had been rationed in Germany, and I had never seen an egg since we were at the camp. I was so surprised. And I could hardly believe it. I could hardly wait to share the egg with my father and my sister. My father gets the egg, he opens it up very carefully, and he takes his finger and he mixes the egg yolk and the white to make it more edible, but suddenly he becomes agitated. And so I go and look to see what was the matter, and lo and behold, there was blood in the egg. And I knew what that meant. Because I told you my father was an Orthodox Jew, and Orthodox Jews follow certain dietary laws. And according to these laws, he could not eat that egg. But I thought, oh, he'll make an exception. After all, we're starving, and he'll share the egg with us. To my utter surprise, my father took that egg, he threw it against the wall of the barrack. To this day, I still can see this yellow ooze come down. I go run to the wall to eat it, to lick it off. But before I got there, I happened to turn around. I see the expression on my father's face, and I could not do it. But I was so frustrated. I was mad at him. I didn't understand in one way why he did it. And it took me a little bit of time to grow up when I realized what my father had been saying to us. What he was saying was this: I have no control as what the Nazis do with me physically, but mentally, I still have a choice. I can do what is right for me, or I can do what is wrong. And it was a wonderful lesson for me as I grew up, because there were times, especially as a teenager, I was tempted sometimes to do the wrong thing. But because of that egg, I didn't. I remembered. My father realized something that I hadn't realized. The Nazis did that on purpose. They liked to torment us. It wasn't enough for them to hurt us physically, but they also want to hurt us psychologically. I don't remember getting back to the women's camp because it must have been uneventful. Soon after that episode, I had to say goodbye to my sister. She had become so weak she could hardly walk anymore. I hated to say goodbye to her. Not only was she my sister, she was also my playmate. And then, a couple of months later, my mother and I were transferred to another camp by the name of Websalt. And there, it was the same thing. Except, I must have been even hungrier, because I would go to the garbage cans and see what I could find to eat. And I was in competition with the mice and the rats. And I became sick with cholera. I was put into an infirmary. It was a small room, I remember. It had a window. And surprisingly, I don't remember much about my sickness. One thing I do remember. One day, there was my father standing outside of the window. He wouldn't let him come in, but he could stand outside of the window. And lucky for us, it was a nice day, so the window was open a little bit. And I asked him, how come they let you come and see me? I was so surprised. And he said, it's because I'm being transferred to Mio, concentration camp. I didn't know what that meant. And my father and I had a good visit. But I never realized that that was the last time that I would ever see my father. Mio concentration camp was on the road to Auschwitz. I got better, and my mother came for me. And as we were walking to our barracks, she said to me, you know, you cannot last much longer. It is time for you to also leave the camp. Well, I didn't want to leave her. I wanted to stay with her. She was the only security that I had left, because I didn't know where my dad was. I didn't know where my sister was. And I wanted to stay with her under any circumstances. But she insisted. One day she took me to a place where there was a truck, and we were about 15, 20 kids on that truck. And we were driven out of the camp. I cried bitterly. It was the hardest thing that I had done up to that point in my life, having to say goodbye to my mother. There is this organization, which is still in existence today, called the OSE. It's a Jewish-French organization. Their OSE is their abbreviated name. Their name is Œuvre de Secours aux Enfants, which is French, meaning homes for the rescue of children. It's an organization for Jewish children. They had established children's homes in the central southern part of France, and they tried to take as many children as possible out of these French concentration camps. And so we were driven out of the camp and taken to our first children's home. These homes were in chateaus. They were like mansions, very old ones. And we were about 100 to 150 kids in one of those homes. And there we learned how to speak French. They changed our names from German names to French-sounding names. Like my name, I was born with, was Beate Stern, and they turned it to, and they gave me the name of Beatrice, and now I'm Beatrice, or B. And we spoke French all the time, and we learned it fast. I especially, because I didn't want to speak German anymore. I didn't want to have anything to do with German, anything German. But we were not safe in those homes, so we would be taken from home to home. I remember counting. I was moved 14 different times. Whether that's actually the way it was, I don't remember. But we went from one home to the next, and sometimes back into the same homes. Because when our names came up on the top of the list, we were not safe there anymore. It meant that the Nazis were after us. In one of those homes, when I arrived, a little girl comes and brings me a blanket. I looked at her, she looked at me, and it took us just a few seconds to recognize each other. It was my sister. We were so happy to be again with each other. I made a vow never to be separated again. And we stayed together. In 1943, we were not safe in those homes anymore because by then Hitler had established the death camps. And they were in a bigger hurry than ever to kill all the Jews. So this organization had to find safe places for us. My sister and I, we went to, and we were about, 15 kids, 10 to 15 kids. We were put into a Catholic boarding school convent in New York. And there our lives changed again. We were a lot of kids, and there were about 4, just as many, or just about as many sisters. And it was very nice there. We did everything that the Catholic children did. We studied the catechism, and I learned finally who Jesus is. Also, the story. And I know quite a bit about the Catholic religion. And I liked it there. It was very, very nice. After all, we had 3 meals a day. We slept between 2 sheets. If we were sick, the sisters took good care of us. And it was nice. So I decided maybe it would be a good idea if I should stay, if we would stay there, my sister and I. If we would stay there, it would be so much easier. So I told one of the sisters, I still remember her name, Sir Esperance. She was not only a sister to me, but she also was my good friend. And I said to her, you know, it would be easier to stay here. Why don't I stay with you? And she looks at me in surprise and she says, I tell you what, if you still feel that way after the war, you can come back to us. But in the meantime, I want you to remember your father's teaching. And it was at that time that I did remember. And I thought about it, and I realized that I could not give up my heritage, because it would be like giving up my parents, my sister, and everything that I've ever known. So I never turned Catholic. But to this day, I have very warm feelings when I stayed at the convent. stayed there until almost the end of the war. And then this Jewish French organization, the OSA, took us back again. And what to do with all of us now? Well, in my sister and my case, they advertised in the German Jewish newspaper called the Aufbau that Beate and Susie Stern were looking for any living relatives. And this newspaper circulated in all the capitals of the world and big cities. It was my grandmother who saw the advertisement, and we got our first letter from her. We were overjoyed to know that she was still alive, and also that my uncle and the rest of the family was alive. Also, she told us that there was an aunt, uncle in London, and two sisters of my mother's living in New York City. Soon, we had mail from all of them. They all wanted us to come to be with them, but I want to be with my grandma and go to Israel, except they wouldn't let us. They said it was too long a journey and we couldn't have made it. So it was decided for us that we would go to London. In June 1945, we took a ship, we crossed the English Channel, and we arrived in England. And it was wonderful when we came to London to be with my aunt and uncle, who was the brother of my father and looked like him a lot. It was wonderful being with them. To live in a house again, to have hot and cold running water, to be able to take showers every day or bath, and to start leading a normal life. But after having been there a day or two, I remember, I was walking down the sidewalk, and I don't remember where I was going. It was a nice day, and I had never been by myself before. Always I had kids around me or my sister with me. And here I was all by myself. And suddenly, it was as though a big weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And I realized, for the first